Good morning. I am excited for our My City, My Church series that we'll be launching here in a couple weeks. But today we are in the middle between series. And I always like these Sundays because I have an opportunity to just pray and sense and see what God is speaking to his people. And today I'm excited to share a message with you. I believe that God has it and is going to meet some of you exactly where you are. The title of today's message is God is always at work, even when he seems hidden. God is always at work, even when he seems hidden. If you have your Bible, we're going to be in the Old Testament today in the Book of Esther. I would encourage you to pull that out today. And this week I was walking through Lowe's, and as I began to walk through Lowe's, it was still September. The calendar had not turned to October yet, and yet I found myself a little bit irritated because, like Lowe's always does, they start pulling out the Christmas decorations, at the end of September. And so here I am walking through Lowe's, and I just began to think about all things Christmas. And some of you today, I need to just tell you that it's not okay to start playing Christmas music yet, right? Just no, we're not there yet. But I began to think about all the things Christmas. I began to think about some of my favorite Christmas movies, and there was one particular movie that came to mind that I think stars, one of the very best actors. It's not Tom Cruise. It's not Tom Hanks. It's not Meryl Streep. It's, of course, the very famous Nicolas Cage, right? Now, it's not this particular movie. It's actually the Family Man, right? You can see the picture here, the Family Man. Some of you guys have seen this movie before. And if you haven't, you meet this man named Jack. And here he is. Jack is a business executive. He's on Wall Street. He, in the eyes of the world, has everything, right? He's got power and he's got influence, and he's got all the money that he could ever need. And yet, in this serendipitous moment, or at least it seems that way, he meets this man in a little corner store, which we later find out is an angel. And this man gives him a glimpse of what his life would look like if a few decisions had gone differently. And it could almost seem like in this moment, as we're watching this movie, that you can see how he has this moment where he wakes up one day and he goes, how in the world did I get where I am right now? Some of you remember this moment, right? You remember where he's going, how did I get here today? And some of you, I could just sense it this week as I was preparing this message. Some of you are in that moment in your life right now. How in the world did I get where I am? How in the world do I live in the flattest, dustiest, most aesthetically challenged place in the entire world? How in the world am I single again? How in the world am I still single? How am I married to this person? Or how do I have all of these little people who always have needs, right? And you find yourself in these moments saying, is God even in the midst of this? Does God see me? Is he out to lunch today? But I want to propose to you an idea, and I want you to say it with me. I'm going to come back to it over and over again today. Say it with me. God is always at work, even when he's hidden. Even when it seems like he's hidden. And sometimes it's as clear as day. We can see God working in our life right in front of us, right? Or we can see him working in that family member's life. But other times, it seems like it's more behind the scenes. It's like this serendipitous meeting that will lead to a job interview, or it's a happenstance conversation that leads to a relationship. Sometimes it might be that social media post that hits us just right in that moment when we need to be ministered to. And we can almost think, it's just coincidence. That was just kind of a lucky moment, or it happened by chance. Maybe we can think, it's even a little bit ironic. It's like 10,000 spoons when all you need is a knife. Some of you guys who are 30, just ask your parents about that, right? See, what I want to propose to you today, and what we see all throughout Scripture, what we certainly see throughout the book of Esther, is that God is always at work, my friends. He's always at work, even when he might seem hidden. Today, I want to explore the book of Esther, and we're not going to have time to read the entire thing, and so I'm going to summarize a few of the chapters as we move through it. It's a fascinating book that tells an epic story of a young woman who becomes the queen of Persia, and her uncle Mordecai. They are sovereignly placed in positions of influence for a much bigger purpose than they originally realize. And I think today there's some of us in here that God brought to this church, the 191 Mid-Cities campus, for a specific purpose, to hear this word that God is working in your life. And though you might not see him, he is at work right now. So today I want to challenge you to open your eyes, to pay attention, to see the God who is at work in your life. Esther chapter 1, starting in verse 1, says, "This is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Cush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. And when these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace. For all the people, from the least to the greatest, were in the citadel of Susa." Skip down to verse 9. It says, "Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. And on the 7th day, when King Xerxes was high in spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, Mehaman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abatha, Zethar, and Carcass," which may be an option for those of you who are pregnant for your next child, right? "To bring him before Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and the nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger." This is the word of the Lord. Let me give us just a bit of background here of where we are in the biblical narrative. The book of Esther is set about 500 to 600 years before the birth of Jesus. And we see throughout the Old Testament, over and over again, there's a cycle where God's prophets come and they preach God's word, calling God's people and God's leaders back to God's way. But here's the problem. Over and over and over again, God's people and God's leaders specifically continue to live in open rebellion to God's way. And God is so patient. For years and years and years, his patience is on display. He sends another prophet, calling them back until finally God's patience runs out. And we see in 597, God's hand of protection was removed from Jerusalem, and the armies of Babylon come in and burn the temple and burn the city and exile the people. And for 70 years, it could almost seem like God was out to lunch, like he did not care about his people. But I want to tell you, all you have to do is go read through the book of Daniel and look through the oracle of the book of Ezekiel, and you can see that God was at work even in that time. Even when he seemed like he was hidden, we can see that God was at work in the midst of the exile, that God was caring for his people. He was meeting with his people. And so as we approach the book of Esther today, we see that the exile it's actually over at this point. And though many of those of Jewish descent had returned back to Jerusalem, there were still many, if not even most maybe, that were spread across the Persian Empire. And this is where we find ourselves today as we approach the book of Esther, that there are many Jews who are living across the Persian Empire, and we see that the king, King Xerxes, throws a giant party, right? Ooh, that sounds fun. A 6-month party, and it culminates during the last week, a 7-day festival for all of his servants in the citadel, in the city of Susa. And Queen Vashti is there, and King Xerxes is there, and the author of the Book of Esther, during this shindig, we see the author notes that the king is what the author calls high in spirits, right? The king is merry with wine. In other words, this brother's had a little bit too much of old grandpa's cough medicine, right? And in this moment, he decides that he is going to show off the beauty of his bride, the queen. Now, you may think, well, why couldn't he do that, right? But during this time in history, this was not something that a king should have done. A queen would be covered from head to toe. And so when he does this, he is in the process of humiliating her. And this woman, she is not having it. She's like, sorry, I ain't doing that for you, buddy. And so she says no, and the king subsequently says, okay, then you're demoted to the harem, and the king is on the lookout for a new queen. And you could wonder, what is God doing in the midst of this situation? Well, the king throws a beauty pageant. Students, let me tell you, this is one of those moments where the Bible is descriptive, not prescriptive, right? This is one of these moments where we see that in this pagan empire, the king here, he decides that he wants a new queen. Esther chapter 2, verse 17. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all the nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. Here we are. We find ourselves in Esther chapter 2, and we see that Esther is an orphan. And the text doesn't tell us how she became an orphan. We don't know what happened to her mom or her dad, but we do find out that her legal guardian is a man who is her uncle. His name is Mordecai. Everybody say Mordecai. Mordecai had raised her and taken her in as his own daughter. And we see likely that Queen Esther at this point, many scholars think that she was probably a young teenager, maybe 13, 14, 15 years old. And she's hiding her Jewish identity, and she wins the beauty pageant. And she's chosen to be a queen, though she is in exile in a foreign land. Can you imagine? Think of this, students. Can you imagine being in this position, having this kind of authority? And it just reminds me how, as God is working, even when he seems hidden, we see that sometimes God will allow you and I to be put in a position that has a much bigger purpose than we initially realize. In fact, some of you are in a position in your company right now, in your business right now. Some of you have been put in this circle of influence where God has a much bigger purpose than you can see right now, right? We don't even realize what the ultimate purpose of it is for. Maybe it's that land that you purchased and you think, oh, it's just for this purpose. But no, God has a much bigger plan for that, right? Maybe it's that conversation that comes to mind over and over again. And really, God has his hand all over it. It's about much bigger things than you see on the surface. Maybe that business deal is actually much more about the person that you're doing the deal with than it is actually about the deal. You see, God will sometimes put us in positions, and this is exactly what he did with Esther. It had a bigger purpose than she realized on the surface. And as I was preparing this message this week, I could sense that God is doing some things in the midst of our life circumstances. He's doing something in the midst of that diagnosis that you just got. That God's doing something in the midst of that wayward child that you pray for all the time. He's doing something in you, actually, That God is doing something in the midst of that situation in your school, students. That God is doing something in the midst of your singleness. He's forming you and changing you. God has a bigger purpose. And I don't know about you guys, but our problem often, we see this all throughout Scripture, is most of the time we have about a 25-foot view when God has a 30,000-foot view. He's doing something in the midst of it. And even when he seems hidden, God is at work today. This was exactly the case when Jesus said to his disciples, I must go soon. And they were like, no, you can't leave us. But he knew that soon he would be going to the cross. And he would be taking on my sin and your sin, my shame and your shame, that he would take that to the cross and he would overcome death and the grave. He was actually recreating humanity in that moment. God is always at work, even when he seems hidden. This week, I was a part of a very small, very, very minor car accident. And it was this moment where this woman who was on her phone, she wasn't really paying attention, and she should have been. And we were driving down the highway, and she kind of started coming over into our lane, and her mirror just barely hit the side of the car. But it was one of these deals where, you know, it could have been the person who was driving the car could have just let her have it. I mean, honestly, like, she shouldn't have been doing that. She was probably breaking the law. And the person who actually was driving the car could have said, what were you doing? And yet I watched how this thing played out. It was it felt like a divine moment where it could have been just like letting her have it that day, but instead the person who was driving blessed her. There was so much power in it. I could like feel it in my heart. I was like, and I watched this woman, when she pulls up initially, she is so dejected, so discouraged, and she gets in her car to leave, and she's been blessed, and she's been prayed for, and she's been encouraged. And I was like, this is incredible. God was at work in that moment. And I watched this person who partnered with him. Oh man, it inspired me. I don't know about you guys, but we see that God had a bigger purpose for Esther in her position. And he has a bigger purpose for some of us here today. In fact, we can just sense it in our heart right now. Like, I can sense the Spirit moving, speaking to some of you that the position that he has called you to, he has a bigger purpose than it. And God had a bigger purpose for Mordecai too. We see in chapter 2, verse 21, it says, during that time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, and Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. And all of this was recorded in the book of Annals in the presence of the king. Keep that in mind for later. It was recorded in the presence of the king. Now just remember, we see we're 45 verses into this book, 2 chapters in, and God's name has not been mentioned one time. In fact, God's name is not mentioned one single time throughout all 10 chapters of the Book of Esther. And yet, in the midst of this moment, we see that Esther has become queen, and Mordecai, her uncle, has actually foiled an assassination plot against the king. And I just am reminded in this moment that where the enemy has plans for evil, God, he so often turns it for good. Where the enemy has plans for evil in your life, there'll be this divine reversal. We see this all throughout Scripture. In the book of Numbers, we see that the prophet Balaam is hired to go curse God's people, but guess what happens instead? He blesses them instead. Levi, the tax collector, the one who stole from all the Jewish people who had conspired to work with the Roman government, we see that when Jesus has an encounter with him, his life completely changes. He becomes one of Jesus's best friends. He's one of the 4 authors of the gospel. We see the apostle Paul, who had actually stood over the killing of Stephen. And yet when he has an encounter with Jesus Christ, he has this divine reversal. He ends up writing much of the New Testament. This is God's way. And this is exactly what we see in Esther chapter 3 when a new character comes on the scene. His name is Haman. Everybody say, ooh. This brother is Darth Vader level evil, right? He's evil, definitely an evil character in the story. He has a serious superiority complex, and this was anything but a humble man. Let me just tell you, everything about him, his plans, his personality, man, he wants people to bow down to him. Esther chapter 3, we see that Mordecai didn't play that game, right? When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all. Everybody say all. He wanted to destroy not just one person, but he wanted to destroy an entire race. An entire ethnicity he wanted to get rid of the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. And Haman convinced the king to kill all of the people. And this is that moment in the story. If you were watching it on the movie screen, you would feel like, oh, what's gonna happen, right? This evil character, Haman, has come on the scene. How in the world is God going to rescue them? Is God out to lunch? Is he paying attention? Or is God at work even when he seems hidden? Well, God's at work, of course. We see that God is at work even when he seems to be hidden. And you can imagine how Mordecai felt in this moment. You can imagine how Queen Esther felt in this moment. And as God often does, this is just his way. He could have dealt with Haman on his own, couldn't he have? Nod your head, yeah. He could have dealt with him. He could have just, I'm gonna strike him. I'm gonna send thunderbolts and lightning like, John and James wanted Jesus to do. No. God works with people for the restoration of humanity. As God often does, he actually partners with Mordecai and he partners with Esther. This is God's way. It's always been his way, is to partner with people. And Mordecai knows this. And so he sends an ancient text message, right? Pulls out his phone, texts Queen Esther, and he says, it's you, sweet girl. He says, you gotta be the one. You're our only hope. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Esther chapter 4, he says, for if you remain silent, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise. It's still gonna happen, right? He trusts that God will do it from another place, but you and your family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position. Say it with me. For such a time as this. God's always at work. He's always at work, working in people, working through people. Even when we think that he's not working, he's working behind the scenes. And so Esther, I love Esther's heart. This is what she does. She says, go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Some of us right now, we're not sure what to do. I think Esther would tell us, you should fast. You should get somebody praying for you. Look what she says. She says, don't eat or drink for 3 nights, night or day. And I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king. Ooh, she's brave, right? And even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Man, that girl had it. She had it. She knows the power of obedience. She knows the power of prayer. And I'm just reminded in this moment that little acts of obedience demonstrate faith in God's power. It was that little act of obedience, fasting, asking others to fast, and then having that perspective of, he's got it. If I perish, I perish. I love Esther's faith. I love her willingness to trust God. This is really where the rubber meets the road for us when it comes to faith is, are we gonna be obedient? Are we gonna try to do it our own way? Do we really trust God? I know I've had moments in my life where, I've done well. There's been other moments in my life where I've been like, I don't know if I trusted him enough. But it's those little acts of obedience in the same way that Esther had that shows that she really trusted that God would deliver her and her people group from that situation. And this is exactly what happens in the story, right? This is exactly what I would encourage you today. If there's something that God is calling you to do, maybe you need to fast, maybe you need to pray about it, and maybe you just need to step out in obedience. And she trusted that God would work. And then the account gets real interesting in chapter 5. We see that once again, that Mordecai will not bow to Haman. And Esther throws this banquet, and she invites Haman and invites Mordecai, and we see that Haman has cooked up this whole plot. He's built these gallows that he is going to hang Mordecai on the next morning. And yet at this very moment where it seems like things are gonna go off the rails, that very night, maybe it's just chance, maybe it's just irony, maybe it's just coincidence, or maybe, just maybe, God was at work in that moment. Because that night, the story tells us that the king just can't sleep that night. For whatever reason, he's been able to sleep every other night, but just like some of you last night, you just couldn't sleep, right? I don't know what's wrong, give me some melatonin, right? And that was, maybe some of you, well, that was the king that night. He could not sleep. And in a surprising and ironic twist, we see the king has insomnia. And so he says, hey, can you bring that book of Annals? Can you read me that book? I need some help sleeping, and maybe, just maybe, that book will help me sleep. And we see, as they're reading the account, they come to this moment where they read about a guy named Mordecai, who some years before had saved the king. Esther chapter 6, he says, what honor and what recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asks. Oh, nothing, the attendant says. Nothing has been done for him. See, God was at work. He was at work, even though he seemed hidden. And the story goes on to tell us that in another surprising reversal, instead of Mordecai being the one who is hanged on those gallows the next morning, that it is actually the wicked Haman who is hanged on those gallows. God's name is not mentioned one time in the book of Esther, and yet his fingerprints are all over that book. And I can't help but think that the same is true in some of your lives today. In fact, I could just sense it as I was writing this message this week, that there is some of you that are here not by chance today, that you came to church because you need to be reminded that God is at work in your life. That God is actually doing far more than you see on the surface, that job that you're in, that partnership that you're in, that those little people that are always pulling on you, needing snacks and water and whatever it may be, that God has a bigger purpose in your life than you realize for the position that you are in right now. Friends, I want to tell you that God is so good. And so today, to finish our time together, I want to challenge you with two ideas. One, to simply open your eyes and pay attention to the work that's going on around you. Some of us may even need to pull out a journal today and just begin to listen to the Lord, to sense what he's telling us. And all of a sudden you'll begin to see all of these little moments that look like, oh, it's just a little serendipitous moment. No. That's the God of the universe who's working in your life. And so today, to end our time, I want to just have you sing a hymn with me, really as a prayer. It's probably a verse that every single one of us has heard at one time or another. I'm not a great singer, but I'm going to start us anyway. And this is how we're going to end today. And let it be just a prayer of your heart as we sing this. So would you bow your head? Just sing it with me if you know it. God is so good. God